Delighted to welcome you to another live Action for Happiness event. I'm Mark Williamson, and it's such a pleasure to see hundreds of you joining us again for one of these events. And tonight, today, whatever time of day it is with you around the world, I'm particularly delighted that we're joined by Alice Sheldon. Alice, thank you for being here.
It is so much a pleasure, Mark. Thank you for having me.
Really looking forward to this conversation on happiness and needs. I'm recognizing lots of familiar names in the chat already, so thank you so much for being here if you're a regular member of this community. And if this is the first time at one of these events, a very warm welcome to you. Alice and I will be having a general conversation for roughly half an hour, but also including some interactive things that you can get involved with to find out more about this topic and what it means for you. And then we'll have a chance to put some of your questions to Alice. So we'll be using the Q&A function, and there'll be lots of chance for you to get involved in various ways. As always, let's keep the conversation on the chat kind and relevant and supportive. People are fantastic at sharing really helpful resources, and we are also going to share a link in there at one point that we're going to use during the event as well. So thank you all for being here. Let's move on to happiness and needs. Alice, before we dive into needs, maybe you could say a little bit about yourself and what's brought you to this topic.
I will, with pleasure, Mark. So my kind of interest background, if you like, is psychology and neurophysiology, but much more personally, I grew up both extremely successful in every measure that you could have academically and career-wise later on, and also very, very unhappy inside. Didn't show. I was very good at masking it. But by the time that I got to my mid-30s, I was experiencing some real, problems in my life, with my relationships, with my work, and most of all, seeing the state of the world and feeling overwhelmed by it, really. And this was the point at which I found the work that the book that I've written and that my practice now is all based around. So for me, it has been one of the very key things that has helped me with both the day-to-day living and the sort of bigger world piece. And it's a delight to share it. As you can see from my wide smile, I am now in a very different place. I have a wonderful life, and all is very different from how it looked not such a little while ago.
Thank you for sharing that, Alice. And you mentioned the book, and it's something I've found. It's called Why Won't We Talk This at School? And I think I was really struck by how profound that title was for me in engaging with your work, because it feels that what we're going to talk about in this event is something that should be a vital part of all of our sort of emotional and psychological education, because it's a bedrock for wise living. And yet it does feel like it's territory we're not very familiar with. So I wondered if maybe you could say a little bit more about needs, what you mean by that, and why it's potentially a really helpful way of looking at the world.
Sure. So when I'm talking about needs, it's such a loaded word in the English language. But when I talk about needs, what I mean is anything that we as human beings need in order to thrive, as well as to survive. So we're all familiar with the survival needs of food and water and shelter and so forth. But I would also be including in there a much wider range of things that one could say for pretty much any human being, wherever in the world. This is something that we need. Things like knowing that we belong. Things like love or creativity or a sense of purpose. And when one comes to write out the needs in a list, and we'll be looking at a needs list a little later in the call, to give you a sense, they kind of fit onto one, in English language, onto one side of A4 paper. That's sort of what a needs list looks like. And that's the thing that I would, just to get it in early, be encouraging everyone to sort of play with. Have it on your fridge, have it on your bedroom door, wherever. Just have fun with it.
Great. Well, in a moment, I think we will have a chance to share a needs list and have some fun with it. But I think as part of that, I know you do some interactive ways of helping us not only tune into needs, but also ground with ourselves a little bit more. I think in a moment, I'm going to invite you to take us through a meditation exercise, Alice. But why don't we, my colleague Alex, who's kindly looking after us behind the scenes today, I think we'll be able to share a link to a list of needs in the chat. So if you're on a device where you're able to click on that link, which has just appeared, thank you, Alex, you can get that on your screen in a moment. But also at the point we get to this, the relevant point in a few moments, I'll try and share it on screen as well. But Alice, why don't we pause in the chat for now and tune into this little exercise to get warmed up. Over to you.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, so this is an offering. Please engage with it if you want to. If it's not working for you, do it your own way, or don't do it at all. That's absolutely fine. But I will invite you just to a 2-3 minute little process. And as Mark says, it's helpful. We'll come to the needs list at the end. It's helpful if you're able to see one, and not a big drama if not at all. So let me invite you, if you're comfortable, just to close your eyes where you're sitting and be really comfortable as you can be in your chair or your bed or wherever you are. And then I'd invite you to join me in taking 3 or 4 deep breaths. And I want to invite you to turn your attention to what is going on inside your body. What are the physical sensations, if any, that you're feeling at the moment? So I'm thinking about things like a heaviness, or that butterfly excited feeling, a weariness, a tingling. Just check out in different parts of your body what you're feeling. Take a moment as well to see if there are any feelings words, emotion words that are attached to those sensations. When I say feelings words, I'm thinking of the words that we use, like tiredness or excitement or sadness. Yeah, finally, I'm going to ask you now to turn your attention to the list of needs that you have, or that we're about to be able to see on screen. Thank you, Alex and Mark, for your magic. And this is the A4 sheet I was describing earlier. So still in touch with what's going on in your body, just to scan over that list and see if there are any needs that jump out for you. And we're looking at this point for maybe 1 or 2 things that might jump out for you. And don't worry at all if there aren't, that's fine too. You can also look for needs that are interesting to you. Maybe there are 1 or 2 that you're interested in, and maybe there aren't, and that's also fine. But take a moment to have a look, and I can see already in the chat that some needs are starting to appear, which is wonderful. If you'd like to share what comes up for you, then please do.
So Alice, I'm just going to pause that for a moment and just share some of what's coming up from the community here. So freedom, joy, honesty, health, belonging, knowing I'm enough, love, mystery, space, acceptance, rest, to be seen, appreciation, connection, healing, beauty, integration, purpose, inspiration, affection, peace, relaxation, touch, humor, stability, health. I'm feeling really moved by this list, actually. It feels really, really powerful. Lots of sort of common themes, but also a huge diversity as well. What are you seeing?
I'm absolutely loving it. And like you, I have this real sense of abundance and fullness, that actually here we are, all human beings in our different places and all with our own particular problems and stresses and strains, and also with access to this wonderful group of needs. And like you, very touched by the the common themes and also the difference that I'm seeing coming through.
We will share lots of resources after this event in the follow-up email, everyone, so you can have a chance to explore the list of needs more widely, as well as some of Alice's other resources. But thank you so much for sharing those, and I'm sure those themes that have come up for each of you will continue to be involved in this conversation. But I guess to make this practical, Alice, we're interested in how do we apply this? It's a starting point, it feels, to tune into what one or more of our needs might be. But how might we sort of think about applying this in our lives, for example, in how we're interacting with somebody else or how somebody else is behaving towards us and so on?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And I'll just backtrack slightly to say that exactly that. The purpose of this exercise is to put us in touch with that body of stuff that we're talking about with our needs. And if we were in real life together and there was enough space, then I'd be really wanting us to explore with each other why each of those needs is coming up for each person. But the thing that I didn't say earlier, which I guess is really fundamental to this whole body of work before we dive into a practical example, is that when we're thinking about needs, the power comes from a very core principle, which is that if we start to look through what I call needs glasses, if we start to look through glasses where we understand our own behavior and other people's behavior as an attempt to meet these beautiful needs that we're all coming up with, then we unlock keys in how to live. We unlock keys in our own behavior and our own healing journey, and we unlock keys in terms of how we want to relate to other people and what we do out in the world. So yeah, thank you for bearing with my little digression backwards. And would you like to move on to a practical example?
Yeah, I mean, that's
there?
really helpful context, and it's I know you've had lots of experience of applying this wisdom, not only in sort of putting together a really accessible book, but also working with so many different people to explore their needs and so on. So I have found in talking to you, it's like taking a case study almost is a really enlightening way of understanding what this means in practice. So maybe you could think of one to share with us.
I'd love to. And I think the one that I want to use is one that's just happened to me this week. So it's very live. I always love live things that are happening. And I've just bought a new flat that needs a great deal of work just to situate people. I'm based in London in the UK. And I've bought this flat just down the road from where I currently am renting. And I have had a number of quotes done for different things. And there was one quote which I found very challenging when I opened it. And it wasn't so much about the level of the quote, although it is a big number. It was more that I had met the tradesperson who gave me this quote and had a very enjoyable conversation with them. And when I opened the quote, it looked to me, well, I'll tell you the judgment that I had. The judgment I had was, he is completely taking the insert swear word. This is completely taking the mickey. The job that he is quoting for, I'm imagining would take, maybe 3 days, and he's quoted for 16. And I found it very challenging. And it was something to do with trust and this sense of being taken for a ride. So I decided I would have a conversation with him. And so we spoke on the phone this week. My purpose in the conversation was to understand more about where he was coming from, and also to convey to him my something of my a concern about the quote that he'd given me. So that's the scenario, Mark. And clearly, for most of us, conversations about challenge are tricksy. They're not easy things to do often. I'll tell you some of my other judgments because this might help. I'm going to, again, invite the audience if they're willing to be involved in this. But the other voices in my head were, I'm a single woman. This man is just thinking that I won't know what I'm talking about. And so giving me, a big number, he's taking advantage of me. And And I think it's fair to say I probably had a stronger reaction than many people would have. And we can think about that in a moment. But first of all, I guess what I'd love to do is to ask our audience, with the help of a needs list, if you've got access to one, to have a guess at what you think my needs in this situation might be. What is it that I might be needing?
So while the list's on screen, I'm seeing respect, honesty, to be heard, trust, security, fairness, reassurance, meaning, authenticity, partnership, emotional safety, care, and then quite a lot of repetition of respect and integrity and transparency and so on. How do they do, Alice? Is that how you?
Right.
Is that
well,
close?
I love this. So here's a thing to say, which is that guessing needs, whether or not you get them right, whether they match with the person, just to guess the needs is already wonderful, because it takes you into the right dimension. So you don't need to get this right. It's just brilliant to be able to connect with someone else at this kind of level. And you can do this, you don't need to say anything to them. You can do this with with anybody in the street. You can try and just connect with, why is this person behaving in this way that I don't like, or whatever it is. So actually, I will tell you, Mark, that for me in this situation, the thing that I would have done before needs understanding is I would probably have just hidden away from it. I probably wouldn't have risked going into a conversation with this man. I might just have totally turned away the quote and found somebody else, but I definitely wouldn't have engaged relationally. It's also the case that someone else in my position might have got really angry with the tradesperson involved. And for me, what needs understanding does is it gives me a third way. So it's not running away, and it's not going full blast in with a whole load of emotional blare onto somebody. It's a center way. And the reason that I did that was because the need that I connected with in me in this situation, it's around respect. And if I kind of take it one level deeper, it's actually around knowing that I am valid and valued, regardless of whether I've kind of, whether I'm challenging someone or not. It's not the wrong thing to do to challenge somebody. And you mentioned, I think, a little earlier about this idea about fingerprint needs. And the reason, if I tell you, so what I should say is that my emotional reaction when I went to call this man was really powerful. And it's not something I often feel these days, but I very much recognize it of old. I had this sort of wash of coldness through my whole body, a real sort of shame reaction. And for me, what that tells me when I feel that is, this is not Alice, the competent, professional woman in the present. This is that Alice combined with a much, much older one, a much littler one who had these reactions at a much younger age, and something in the present has triggered it. And this is the concept of the fingerprint needs that we have, that I think can be so helpful for us to.
So sorry, just to make sure I understand that, Alice. So
Sure.
that a lot of the really sort of perhaps the most core or deepest of the needs trace back to early childhood experiences, formative years. Is that what you mean?
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. So when we're triggered, and a trigger can look like shame, as it did in my case in this situation, or it can look like anger or anxiety. It's any emotion that is disproportionate to what's happening in the moment. When that happens, we can be pretty sure that there's something that is going on that relates to a long time ago. Does that make more sense?
And I can relate to that, because I have these sort of unexpectedly visceral feelings in what you might otherwise describe as normal situations, like a discussion my wife and I might be having about something fairly mundane can suddenly trigger a huge overreaction in me. And I think that's probably what's going on there, is something that's a lot deeper is being triggered in some way.
That sounds right, Mark. And what we then tend to find, so if there are our own triggers, we can feel a bit embarrassed. Like, I don't know about you, I know you have children, and not a dissimilar age from my own, and sometimes I think, why am I I'm such a terrible parent. Why am I reacting with this sort of red mist towards my child? But it's almost certainly going to be a fingerprint need that's touched. And if I know that, then it's much easier for me to hold it. So actually in the conversation, rather than running away or getting really, I was really angry actually, but I didn't dump it on him. I didn't blame him for where he was coming from. I just really made sure that he could hear where I was coming from.
Well, I'd love to come back to him in a moment, but just to draw attention to something that is a beautiful summary of what I think you've just shared from a couple of people in the chat. They've just said, if it's hysterical, it's historical, which I think is a really nice sort of paraphrasing of that fingerprint need.
I love that. And actually that is in the book. And in fact, I had a conversation with the publisher was that an issue that, because hysteria goes back to wombs and women. And anyway, all I'm saying is that the audience are on it. So yeah, absolutely.
So what about this man who's trying to earn a living, trying to, get this job done, giving you a quote? What do we need to sort of think about his needs as well?
Perfect. So actually in this instance, to be honest, for me, I needed more to look after myself, because what I didn't want to do was what we can do with unprocessed triggers, which is turn up and blurt them onto him, either by crying and being sort of, like, oh, take pity on me, or by being really angry or whatever. So in this instance, there was more work around that. However, let's turn now and think about what exactly, as you say, Mark, what is going on for this builder. Can we get people to guess again? Because that was delightful.
Let's do that. So if you'd like to share in the chat what you think some of this man's needs might have been in this situation. Let me just put the needs list up again, just temporarily. So what could be going on there? So needing money to feed his family, needing to feel valued, needing safety, financial security, control, maybe didn't want the job, a sense of fear or lack of self-esteem, wanting to make a profit, responsibility, fair recompense, validation, feeling valued, sense of power, pride in his work, greed, perhaps, consideration, autonomy. Interesting one here, mourning for a loss. I mean, that's an example of who knows actually what's going on for someone. What are you seeing in that list, Alice?
Yeah, again, I'm really enjoying it, and I'm recognizing that I have particular guesses which chime with some of those things. Obviously, I have the advantage because I've met him and had some conversations with him. But even then, as another person, we never know actually what the needs are at play. We never know. We don't know. We don't recognize someone else's fingerprint needs getting triggered. And my guess probably. Often when my fingerprint need is triggered, it's very, and there's a sort of conflict going on, it's very possible that his is as well. I saw some around lack of self-esteem, and who knows? For me in this situation, I didn't need to know. What I needed to do was to let him know that I'd understood enough. What I actually said, I didn't talk about needs, I talked about strategy. What I actually said to him was, I absolutely understand and support that you want to make a profit on this work, and I want you to be properly paid. So in a sense, I'm wanting to, in the book, we use this picture of two islands and crossing over to the other person's island to try to make the connection. Now, I will say this was an angry conversation. This was not a pretty conversation, but it was a conversation without blame. And that, I think, is key, because I don't think this work is about being nice. I think this work is about being deeply compassionate and kind, and also about being, together powerful, if you like. Like, I don't want a world where people are chopping off the bits of themselves that might be difficult. I want a world where those are brought, but without putting the blame onto somebody else.
So I'd love to, in a moment or a bit later on, go out to this question because it feels like so much of what's going on in our world and our society and our politics and everything it relates in some way to how we misalign or misunderstand or try and pursue our needs in unhelpful ways. But actually, I think this microdynamic of us individually and our interactions with just one other person are complex enough and apply to everything we do in many ways. So I guess I'd love your insights into how we can be a little bit better at noticing our own needs, and then how we can also be a little bit more wise about trying to understand other people's needs.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So I like the idea that there are different warning signals about our needs. I mean, I'm at this moment, I'm talking about when we're particularly when we're in the situations which tend to cause us the most problems, i.e. the triggered ones. So often what will first of all alert people to the fact that they're on their way into a dangerous situation is the thoughts that they're having. So those can be the thought, if I hear myself blaming you, or I hear myself in my head telling myself, blaming myself for something, then I'm almost certainly, in fact, I would say I am certainly, in the world that as I see it, then there are needs going on that are unmet. So I'll give you an example. There was a lovely moment with my teenager who's grown up with this way of working. We're off on a lovely trip to the swimming pool. Very nice. Both of us love swimming. Really nice way to spend mother-daughter time together. We get to the swimming pool and out of nowhere, we're changing in the changing room, out of nowhere, Mum, you are so annoying. Why can't you just put your bag on your own peg? You're taking my space. It was like, you know, from literally sort of from nowhere. And I looked at her, and as I looked at her, this little smile crept up the side of her face. And she said, Mum, you know that snack you left me in the kitchen? I was like, yeah. Well, I might not actually have eaten it. She's like, I'm really, really hungry. Now, what she did there was really skillful, in my view. And that's what she's better at it than I am often. Hangry, exactly. It's the ability, instead of dumping our stuff on ourselves and making ourselves feel bad or someone else, to notice, I've got stuff that's going on for me, and let me instead turn to what the needs might be underneath.
That's really wise. I think that's sort of, it's kind of emotional intelligence and self-awareness, but it's particularly something about like when I feel a kind of stronger emotion, I need to just ask myself what's actually going on underneath the surface here. Is that a good sort of cue or trigger, do you think?
Absolutely. I love that. I mean, we can ask ourselves with any feeling, we would say that feeling comes from a need that's alive in us, but it becomes more acutely relevant often when we're in a sort of state where we're about to do something that is going to be hurtful for us or hurtful for someone else.
And we've tried to empathize in the context of this interaction with the man you've been talking about, but and that's one particular type of relationship. But I think to take it to a different one, let's say the one with your daughter, often we are in dialogue, discussion, living with loved ones, and we are in conflict with the people we love the most. And so we, rather than wanting to seal a deal, as you might with a tradesperson, you might want to just understand them. So are there simple things we can do to try and say, I wonder what's going on behind there, but again, without amplifying or making things worse? What sort of things can we do to understand our loved ones' needs?
Yeah, lovely. Well, I've done, I mean, one of my favorite, I started with this in the book because I think it's so accessible. You can really work on this for 2 or 3 hours and make a significant shift in a dynamic, especially in your families or with loved ones. There are things not to do, and the things not to do if someone wants to be heard are to try to fix the situation, to advise them, to tell them exactly how it feels. There's a whole list of I've put it into a list of 10 in the book. That's slightly just think of a number. You can work it anyway. But there are these ways that we do with a great intention of helping, and they usually don't land as help. They can be very useful if someone doesn't need to be heard. And so therefore, the most helpful thing that we can do, certainly before trying to say anything, the most helpful thing is just not to say anything and just to listen, to give the other person space. So that looks like not following the direction I want to go in, but following the direction they want to go in. So Mark, tell me more, have you said everything you wanted to about that? Is there more that you'd like to say? Just just really going with the story and listening.
I love that, and it reminds me of something I think I've shared before in one of these events, but I love this. I was sort of engaged with this program called Couples Therapy. It's a series on BBC, I think, but this incredibly skillful couples therapist meets people in different sort of challenging situations, and often when somebody's sharing something that's clearly important to the dynamic, she just simply says, "Tell me." And that person sort of starts talking more about it. And just those two words have suddenly given someone permission. You're sort of saying, this matters, I want to hear more.
Yeah.
And that's all she does. And yet this amazing stuff comes out of people in response to it. It's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that I really, really, when you get to a certain point in the conversation, it can be really helpful just to say, what can I do? Is there something I can do? How can I help? So again, you're saying in that message, I'm here, I'm available, but the ball is in your court. What would you like?
Thank you. This is incredibly wise and super practical as well. So I love the fact we've been sort of trying to be detectives at spotting needs. And I think maybe our homework to go away from this is partly to get a little bit better at noticing not only our own needs, but trying to spot what might be going on for other people, albeit knowing that we can never be certain. So I think in summarizing what you said so far, there's something really valuable that happens if we can look at the world with our needs glasses on, starting with understanding our own needs, but then also recognizing needs in others. And I guess you might say, a bit like the oxygen mask principle, we need to do ourselves before we can really do others. Is that right?
Yeah, that's really helpful, Mark. Let me say something that, again, I found really practical when I discovered it. So when you are in a difficult situation like me in the builder, the first thing to do is what's going on for me. This is all internal. What's going on for me? Connect with me. Then I quietly connect with what might be going on for the builder. But when I come to speak, I speak first about the builder and then about me. So it's like a kind of, loop round, connect internally, because if I don't connect with myself first, there's no way I can empathize with the builder if I'm caught up in my fingerprint need of knowing that I'm enough. And so when I talk about the builder in this instance, as I say, for me, it was just a, one-liner of kind of recognizing his desire to make money properly from this job. And then I spoke about myself.
So that brings me, I think, onto this sort of application of the needs principles into wider society. And of course, it's hard enough to change ourselves, and we certainly can't change our loved ones, and let alone necessarily change the world. And yet I feel really deeply that if more of us had this level of self-awareness and sort of almost empathic understanding of other people's needs, the world would be a radically different place. The way that we treat our neighbors, the way that we think about the other, whether that's, our divisions by geography or by politics or by interest or whatever it might be, in a world that feels so divided and confrontational and almost, you're either with us or against us. That seems to be losing all the subtlety of the human, the whole diversity of human needs. And in fact, people might be arguing, thinking they're opposite ends of the spectrum, and yet, in fact, perhaps even trying to meet the same need, but in different ways. The need for security, the need for being valued, and so on. So is there a way that, do you think this model applies to the bigger social issues that we see around us?
Thanks, Mark. I do. And actually, it's one of the things that, for me, there are many, many roads around emotional intelligence and having a greater understanding of ourselves, which I love and value. The piece that for me is different with the needs bit is what I so often see. And I mean, everyone's politics will be different. For me, I would, describe myself as sort of liberal left wing. And so when I, it's very easy if I experience someone from a very different politics to turn away and to see what's wrong with them and their politics. I don't see, even within my liberal open circles, I don't see very much capacity for understanding behaviour that we find abhorrent. And it's not that the behaviour isn't, in my view, abhorrent at all. It is. And if I can genuinely start to understand what might be going on for that individual or for that group, that there might be, in my view, there will be a beautiful need underneath this behaviour, that doesn't make me complicit in that view. It makes me more able to connect with the person underneath it and to powerfully bring my own view. And that's where I think that if we see behavior as an expression of needs, it doesn't mean that we condone the difficult stuff. It makes the conversation much more likely. And if conversation isn't possible, then it makes the boundary that's put in much more loving, because it's not about blaming. You've got it wrong. It's about, I am not standing for this. This is not okay with me. And therefore I am going to behave with force. And it's not what I want to be doing, but I don't know how else to deal with this.
I'm not sure if you ever saw the incredible TEDx talk by Jo Berry about empathy, but she was a woman whose father was killed in an IRA bomb decades ago now. And she was obviously, as a young girl, really traumatized by this, but went on a path that eventually led her to not only finding out who was the person who planted the bomb, but actually coming face to face and having a chance to meet the person that killed her father. Mm-hmm. And she's this incredible thing where she says, I will never be at peace with what was done, but yet getting to know him and hearing his story, I was able to understand how he could have ended up in a position where he did that. And I might even go as far as say, had I grown up in the same situation, I might have even ended up in that situation myself. And it was like, wow, that takes huge courage. And I guess what you're saying is not like condoning someone's behavior, but it's at least understanding what might be behind it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, in my past, I was a barrister, and my child's father is a judge, and we often talk about, you know, if you look at the people who are coming through the courts, then they are not people who've had happy backgrounds generally. People who are, you know, in those positions. That doesn't mean that if you're in those positions, it's okay then to go and behave like that at all. But as you put it, but I'm going to stop, Mark. I've already said enough. You put it much better than I did and made the point. So yeah.
Thank you. I feel that so many people in this community want to help create a happier and kinder world. That's what Action for Happiness is all about. And I would therefore encourage all of us to equip ourselves with more of these this needs understanding. So we'll share some resources tomorrow, and I'm personally trying to go on a bit of a mission to understand and tune into mine more and try and see that in others. But I do think that if we can bring this into our workplaces, in our communities and our discussions and the way we engage with social issues, I think it does make for a more empathic and a more sort of constructive way of responding to the challenges in the world. But I want to turn to Q&A because there's some great questions as always. So if you have a question for Alice, please use the Q&A function, and you can also vote on other people's questions so we can get the most popular ones. But I'm going to start with Kerry's question. He said, how do I start to see my needs as important? At present, I'm more concerned with meeting other people's needs, but often at the expense of my own.
What a lovely question. Thank you, Kerry. I would just say also for everybody, I can't follow the chat, so I haven't seen comments. I shall enjoy reading it afterwards, but I'm not able to respond on the fly. So I guess that there are reasons, both culturally and individually, why we can find it hard to value our own needs. And without wanting to sort of promote the book, I would point you towards that or another similar resource, because it would take too long to explain. I will, though, say something that might be helpful, which is that I really enjoy the idea that each of us has a resource tank inside ourselves. So my resource tank is filled when I go and have coffee, you know, at the end of the working day with a very dear friend, and then I come home to my daughter and I'm like, sweetness and light, she can do whatever she wants, and I'll be like, oh, I'm Zen mother, you know. You know, equally, if I've had a really difficult day and then I've had my mum on the phone and then I've had to, you know, deal with the car breaking down, whatever it is, then my resource tank is empty, and consequently my daughter feels it. So what I would say to you, Kerry, is there are all sorts of really good reasons why you might want to value your needs for yourself and look them up, but actually this one alone, just if you're the kind of person who is very focused on contributing to other people, it is the case that if you look after yourself, you are more able to contribute to other people. Genuinely, I have to tell you, since I've done this work, and at the start of it, I was like, this is so selfish. I shouldn't be doing this. I'm thinking about myself. I can genuinely tell you that the amount of time I spend thinking about myself in a day and the amount I spend thinking about other people has decreased, because I don't need to think about myself. I'm most of the time doing good. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Oh, that's really interesting. So in fact, if we do sort of invest some time in meeting our general needs better and put that sort of self-care foundation, we're almost, that's a really practical example of how we're then better equipped to like look outwards and then help others, because we've sort of almost taken that off the table a little bit.
Absolutely.
Really, really helpful. So there's been a question asked, which I suspect many in the audience are keen to hear the answer to, but I'm going to keep them on tenterhooks. But just to let you know that Louise's question, how did you resolve things with the builder, will get answered before the end of the session. But Joshua has asked, I'm really interested in the importance of fun. I'd love to hear your perspective on how important this need is for adults.
Great question, Joshua. Thank you. And it leads me to say that, whilst all of us have all of the needs, because of our backgrounds and because of our personalities, different needs are more important to each of us. Similarly, depending on what situation we find ourselves in, different needs are important to each of us. And for me, fun is super, super important. So we were speaking just now, the middle of this day it's been so delightful. I launched my book in Chinese. I'm so excited, first foreign language edition. And I couldn't make jokes in the way I normally would, because everything was being translated consecutively. So I'd make a joke and laugh at myself, and everyone else is sitting there looking completely blank. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that I don't think there's a general rule, but I celebrate and love hanging out with people for whom fun is important.
I love that quote that says, we don't stop playing because we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing, which always makes me smile. So before we come to Louise's cliffhanger about the builder situation, Hallie has asked, many of us can relate to historical events or childhood experiences impacting our current adult self. So I guess that's back to your fingerprint needs point. And in turn, our lived experiences of our needs as well. So are there any is there any advice on healing our needs and sort of actionable steps, particularly in relation to those early childhood ones?
Yeah, thank you again for that question. So this is a real personal choice, I guess, or finding out what fits for you. I'll tell you what I do. First, I had some psychotherapy, which I was able to pay for and very privileged to receive, and for me that was really helpful. Second, what I do now, what I did in the conversation with the builder, when I felt that rush of shame come up, then I see my smaller self with her bunches and her really chunky shoes and the clothes that were all wrong according to her peers, and I see my 6 or 7-year-old self, and I just recognize and I say internally, you are totally fine the way you are. You're totally okay. This is a difficult situation, and so for me it's a sense of seeing my little Alice beside me. Some people are like, oh my God, that's just not my thing at all, and they might have a friend that they're talking to. Other people, it's very physical. They want to be in touch with their body and with feeling what is going on for them with that kind of healing. So in my work, I don't do deep healing work. It comes in, of course, to what I'm doing, but I don't take people on that journey because I don't think that's where my resource is most usefully used. But yeah, you do. I think, in my view, the more help you can get with that kind of healing, the better. There are resources within communities for empathy, and that in itself, just to really be heard and seen by another person, is helpful. But for the deep stuff, more is needed often.
I think that's really wise. But I think even those of us that don't have necessarily a really sort of a deep wound to heal, there are still always just aspects about our formative experiences that I think come to bear. So I know that I've learned through this kind of experience that I'm someone has a sort of need, a childhood sort of need to be kind of like praised, I guess, to get a kind of, oh, good boy, you've done well, sort of, recognition. And so what I bring into relationships now when is the potential to really overreact when I don't feel like I'm being seen and appreciated. So, and so the thing I've learned is like just to pause and notice that that's my thing going on, not theirs. So when someone behaves in a way that leaves me feeling underappreciated, I don't need to kind of make it all about me and assume that I'm being criticized. And so I can just sort of take a breath and say, this is something that's going on for my partner or my friend or my colleague, and it's not a critique of me. I can just let it go. And I could never do that. And that was just, so it sort of like almost like takes a burden off shoulders to sort of say,
Yeah.
oh, this isn't about my need right now, actually. I don't need to bring that up.
Yeah, I love that, Mark. I love that. And there is something just about recognizing it. Even now when I go, oh, another one of mine is needing to matter. And I'm like, okay, I recognize you. Hello, need to matter. You're welcome. No, we're not going to let you run the show, because we don't want our fingerprint needs kind of taking us off course, but you're held and yeah, and you're okay.
That's really nice, sort of welcoming the need and saying hello and then moving on.
Yeah.
Very good. So there were some needs in this audience to hear how things did get resolved with the builder. I think you set the story up, you're obviously in a sort of slightly confrontational situation, but with a bit of emotional awareness. How did that play out?
Yeah, so it was really interesting because he could not hear what I was saying. Okay, so this is an interesting point back to how do we get our needs met. We tend to go back and back, like, I want this person to get what I'm feeling. Now you can ask them to, you can do all that you can to communicate, because a lot of the work again is about how do you speak in order that you're going to more likely to be heard, and that's very related to your needs. But you can do all of that and the person still doesn't get it and they don't give you what you're wanting. This builder did not give me a sense that he had heard me in the way that I wanted to be heard. So I just kept on repeating my piece, which was, I absolutely get what you're saying. And for me, I am not seeing how it takes 16 days to do this. I accept that you are the expert and I am happy to learn. I can come and watch. At this point, he did start to retreat, I have to say. But what I actually said to him at the end was, look, I think we need to finish this conversation because I'm just going to keep on saying the same thing. And I suspect you're going to keep on saying the same thing. So I'm going to go away and I'm going to look at some other options and then I'll come back to you. I went away, I bought a circular saw. I'm still here. My leg is still attached, which is good news. And I have managed to remove one room of flooring in 2 hours. So, I'm like, right, okay. I will see. I am not intending to employ this man.
I hope you have a chapter in your book about when needs don't get them just get a circular saw out. That could go wrong. So yeah, well, that's a really great sort of case study to have shared, because actually it didn't all work out perfectly, but no. It allowed you to be more self-aware and allowed you to sort of be more empathic and try and work through a situation that was difficult. And it's kind of, that's the gritty reality of life, isn't it, really?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And also, may I say that as I am sharing this, and I'm not over this yet, there is still stuff here, and I really know how to do this stuff, but there's still a part of me, because that need in me is so strong to know that I haven't got it wrong. Look, please see me, see what I'm doing, and it's a strong thing. And so there's still an edge in my voice that I'm saying this because I'm sure that some of your listeners will hear. There's an edge in my voice. I'm not over it with this man.
People are hearing that. And I know you're not looking at the chat, but you're also getting a lot of love and appreciation in the chat saying DIY, get in, and you're awesome, Alex, and other things. So there's a lot of appreciation for your solution as well. We've got time for a couple more questions. So Fiona's asked what I think is incredibly important and probably quite widely of interest question. How can we put in place good personal boundaries with family members who know how to push our emotional buttons?
Okay, so let me say, this is beyond PhD level needs understanding. You need to hear some of my conversations with my mother. What I would say is, for me anyway, it's really important to practice on the easy stuff first, because if you start trying to do this stuff in the places you most want to do it, then that is almost certainly, you know, inviting a fall. So I always say to people when I'm working with them, when you're trying to empathize, suggest not start with your mother or whoever it is who's your equivalent. You know, suggest start with a dear and lovely friend who's telling you something happy about themselves. You know, definitely, I would say, do it in steps. That said, I right from the beginning have been able to put little bits in you know, in place in that relationship that I find so difficult, and it has absolutely shifted, not so much on the other side, but more in that I am just really clear about my boundaries, and I do put them in a loving way, and they're not usually accepted in that way, but I don't spend hours worrying about it. I just do my best, and yeah.
Thank you. I'm reminded of a quote from a spiritual teacher whose name I can't remember, but it was something like, if you think you're enlightened, try spending a week with your family.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because of course these buttons are constantly pushed.
Yeah.
And a related question, which I think is subtly different but equally important. Natasha has just asked, what if your needs are not met in your marriage, or I guess your kind of close partner relationship? Do you need to compromise at the expense of your needs? And I guess this plays to the sort of two things you just mentioned about boundaries and, well, I guess love and boundaries, and how you hold those, or compassion and boundaries, and how you hold those things together in balance.
Yeah. Yeah, lovely. I mean, and this is a sort of, you know, such an individual question for different people. I think to myself, okay, you know, what do I love and cherish and treasure in this relationship? What fills my, you know, resource tank and meets my needs and gives me a sense of connection, and actually what doesn't? Now, there are going to be some relationships where, however much work we do on them, because I think a lot can change within relationships, with two willing partners and the right support and help. But there are relationships where actually ultimately, if you know, if those that work doesn't shift things sufficiently, then it is the moment to be ready to part. And that for me, you know, with my ex, with whom I was deeply in love for many, many, many years, and we could not find a way to meet each other's needs enough that that we could continue together. So yeah.
Well, that's links into, I think, probably what the last question we're going to have time for, because there's a couple of wrap-up things I want us to share with the audience before we finish today. But Judy has just asked what I think is perhaps the most important question to bring this all together, really, which is, how do we remain realistic about our needs being met? Because we can't have all our needs met all the time, as some of your examples have just shown. So maybe, do we need like a top 5 that absolutely need to be met? Do we need to have a sort of inner sense of prioritization? What would you suggest?
Yeah, lovely again. So there's something which I haven't really explicitly said, although it's probably implicitly obvious, which is that we can meet our own needs for certain things. So when we're involved in healing work, for example, around our past, I don't need someone else to let me know that I matter. That's lovely when it happens, but actually I meet that for myself. So there's a lot of needs meeting that we can learn to do for ourselves. How do I answer that? I mean, it's hard for me, I think, because I do experience now so much of the time so many needs being met, and I think it's probably true that I've got greater capacity now than I used to have for when my needs aren't met, because so much of the time they are. So actually, when I'm in a situation where they're not for a bit, that's, you know, I can choose to be there. But I do think there's something about really, really going for it with our needs, and also knowing that meeting our own needs doesn't mean, it's not like if we meet our needs, then the other person's needs don't get met. That's not how it is. That's like a win-lose, and a compromise is like no one's needs really quite get met. What we're going for with needs understanding is a win-win. So what we're looking for is, through the connection and the relationship and the understanding of each other's needs, that actually we find strategies that meet both of our needs.
I really love that as a sort of way of wrapping up, because it's about enhancing both how we experience life, but also being, better able to support others around us, which of course is the sort of twin aims of the whole Action for Happiness movement. So it's a really lovely place to pause. Alice, this has been so insightful and interesting, and I've already mentioned this brilliant book, Why Weren't We Taught This at School? I've been asking myself that question and would love to try and pass this on to my own kids. I know you've got some other resources, so we're going to send, I think, a link to a set of lists, including the needs lists, and some other resources. Is there anything else you'd like to say about resources people could use as a follow-up?
So yes, I think you're going to circulate my website, which is lovely. There are some sort of pleasurably short after this moments of me just giving 3 to 5 minutes on various topics. I would say the book. I mean, that is really the place to go. And then from there, I think it's probably just best if we send them round in the link, Mark. For people's information, I said that I didn't do. Let me not say what I don't do. Let me say what I do do. What I do is I go into organisations and groups and share this stuff. And I do that because I love working with groups of people. I get really bored with one-on-ones after a few sessions. So I no longer do any one-on-ones. I share those to people who love that kind of work. But that's also, if you're part of a group or an organisation that would enjoy this sort of stuff and you've been interested in it, then do have a look. I see that Alex helpfully put the link in ages ago, but we'll
share that tomorrow. And I'm seeing on the chat now a huge amount of love and appreciation for everything you've shared this evening, Alex. So we'll make sure you see a copy of that tomorrow so you can see everyone's comments. But I'd like to echo that and say a huge thank you to you. And I'd also like to say a big thank you to everyone who's been part of this event and staying engaged, and for all the fantastic ideas and interactive things and great questions. But before we leave, is there any sort of final thought you'd like to leave us with, Alice? How do you wrap all this up?
Yeah, how do I wrap all this up? I don't think I do, Mark. I don't think I do. I think I actually just want to really celebrate again the community that you've created, and you and what you've done with your team, because it's so exciting actually to be a part of. So yeah, it's a privilege and a pleasure to join all of you, and thank you. Mark gave me one instruction, which was that I had to look up at the screen, and I've been looking down because that's where everything is happening. So I'm sorry I have disobeyed your instruction, Mark, but it has been the most lovely hour to be together. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you, everyone. Look forward to seeing you at another Action for Happiness event again very soon. Bye.